millionaire marries a homeless woman for revenge but ends up kneeling for true love. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have one small request. Please click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will not miss our newest videos. It only takes a second, it is completely free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more heartfelt, meaningful stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Tell us your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much. What would you do if revenge brought you face to face with the only person who exposed your true self? Comment below. The night Pride made a deal with fate. Let us return to our main character. The city glitters like a stage, and Alexander Vance is always its brightest light. Young, rich, untouchable, he measures his worth by his victories. When the invitation came, Vanessa Reed and Christopher Hale invite you to their wedding, he didn't flinch. He smiled, but it tasted metallic. Going alone? His best friend Graham asked, raising an eyebrow. Alex raised his glass. No, I'll bring someone unforgettable. That night, he drove aimlessly, his reflection flickering in the windshield, like a man obsessed with his own success. At a red light, a faint violin played through the noise, rough, imperfect, but alive. A young woman stood by the subway entrance, her hair disheveled, her coat too thin for the February air. But her eyes calm, defiant, refused to beg. He stepped closer, his curiosity as sharp as a knife. You played well, he said. She didn't look up. I play to keep warm. He almost laughed. What's your name? Elena. And what if I told you I could make you rich overnight? The violin stopped. She turned, watching him, the arrogance in his posture, the emptiness behind it. I don't do that kind of work, she said evenly. It's not what you think. He pulled a business card from his jacket. I need someone to pretend to be my fiancé. For one night, I'll pay you more than a year's rent. Elena's expression didn't change. Why me? He shrugged. Because no one would believe it. The honesty was deeper than any insult. She was silent for a long moment. Cars drove by, horns blaring, but there was an eerie silence between them. Finally, she put the violin back in its case. If you need a wife to avenge yourself, I'll play the part. She zipped the case shut, her voice low but fierce. But don't expect me to bow. Alex blinked. He hadn't expected her voice to be so stern. There was something in her voice that made him uneasy, like hearing the truth spoken in a room built of lies. As she walked, her shadow stretched out under the streetlights, long and even. He didn't know it yet, but that was the moment his bet began, and the first chink in the armor of a man who had never lost. Where pride writes the contract, love always demands a signature. Stay until the end, because this deal will cost you everything you thought you owned. Part 2. Contract Setup. The Rules of Pretend. The next morning, Alexander arrived at his lawyer's office, a place where everything smelled of money and control. Across the table, Elena Ward sat upright, her old canvas bag resting beside a stack of legal papers. Her hands were still rough from the streets, but her posture carried quiet authority. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. The agreement is simple. 1 month. You will live together. She'll attend social events as your fiancé. Alexander's tone was cool. It's a contract, not a marriage. Elena nodded, her voice calm but firm. Then let's keep it that way. My rules are simple. No touch, no control, no humiliation. Her gaze didn't waver. For a moment, Alexander almost smiled, impressed by her composure. He leaned back. You're bold for someone in your position. She replied evenly. Respect is not a luxury, Mr. Vance. It's the only thing I still own. The words hung in the air like a quiet challenge. Even the lawyer hesitated before continuing. Later that afternoon, they stood in a private studio downtown, surrounded by racks of designer clothing. Alexander's team had arranged fittings for the upcoming gala, the event where Vanessa, his ex-fiancée, would make her grand appearance. Elena stepped out from behind a curtain in a simple evening gown. The tailor adjusted the fabric, muttering to himself. Then, unexpectedly, the designer froze, eyes widening. She has the poise of someone who's walked a red carpet before, he whispered. Alexander looked up. For the first time, he really saw her, not the worn shoes, not the patched bag, but the way she stood, unbothered by judgment. There was no trace of desperation, only grace carved from survival. She met his gaze briefly. "Don't stare, Mr. Vance. I'm just practicing the role you paid for." "May." He smirked faintly, masking a flicker of intrigue. "Then play it well, Miss Ward. The world will be watching." She lifted her chin. "I've been watched all my life. Mostly by people who think they're above me." I stopped caring. The fitting continued in silence, broken only by the sound of fabric being pinned and scissors gliding through silk. When the designer turned away, Alexander spoke softly, almost to himself. "A month, then," Elena replied. "A month. After that, I disappear, and you can have your revenge." He didn't answer. For the first time, revenge didn't sound as satisfying as it had the night before. As she gathered her things, Alexander caught a glimpse of her sketchbook half open on the table, a rough pencil drawing of the city skyline under rain. He almost asked about it, but she closed it before he could speak. That night, as the contract papers were signed and the ink dried, the line between power and dignity blurred, one man chasing pride, one woman protecting respect. Neither of them realized that the performance they agreed to was already starting to feel too real. Under the golden chandeliers of the Lexington Hotel ballroom, conversation hummed like the low murmur of bees. Every table gleamed with crystal glasses and roses dipped in silver dust. Then the doors opened slowly, deliberately, and the hum collapsed into silence. Alexander Vance stepped inside in a tailored black tuxedo. But no one looked at him first. The eyes of the entire room were drawn to the woman walking beside him, Elena Ward. No one recognized her name, but everyone recognized what she carried: poise. She wore an ivory gown that floated like mist, sculpted to her frame with the precision of art. A single line of silver embroidery traced her neckline. Her hair was swept into a low knot, a few loose curls framing her face. No diamonds, no glitter, only quiet radiance. The designer's work had been faultless, but it was her bearing that transformed the dress into something beyond price. Each step was measured, calm, unhurried. The soft sound of her heels on marble echoed through the hall like a rhythm no orchestra could follow. A ripple of whispers started from the far side of the room. "Who is she? Some foreign royalty?" "No. She came with Alexander Vance. Must be his fiancée." Camera flashes began. The press, hungry for a headline, leaned forward. In a city where wealth was noise, her silence was the loudest thing in the room. Alexander offered his arm, his voice low. "They're staring." Elena's lips curved slightly. "They always do. Let them." Her tone wasn't defiance, it was certainty. The same tone she'd used the day she told him, "Respect is the only luxury I still own." As they walked deeper into the hall, heads turned, smiles tightened. The bride, Vanessa Reed, stood at the far end beside her new husband, a man older, richer, more publicly admired. For a heartbeat, her expression faltered. Alexander noticed. He smiled, slow and deliberate. Vanessa's smile stiffened in reply. The master of ceremonies' voice rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Alexander Vance and his fiancée." Gasps fluttered through the crowd. Fiancée. The word ricocheted off marble and glass. Vanessa's husband leaned in, muttering something under his breath. She didn't hear him. Her eyes were locked on Elena, on the woman who stood like calm water in a storm. When Alexander and Elena approached, Vanessa greeted them, her voice too bright. "Alexander, how unexpected. You didn't say you were bringing company." Alexander's smile was razor-thin. "Elena Ward," he said smoothly. "My fiancée." Elena inclined her head. "Congratulations, Mrs. Reed. You look radiant." For a moment, the bride didn't reply. The photographer snapped twice before she remembered to smile. From somewhere behind them, a guest whispered, "She looks familiar." Another voice joined in, sharper. "Isn't that the woman who used to play violin near Central Park? The one who played in the rain?" The murmur spread like wildfire. Elena heard it. She didn't flinch. She simply shifted the glass in her hand and lifted her chin, eyes calm and unyielding. A woman nearby laughed quietly behind her champagne flute. A street musician at a wedding like this? How avant-garde. Elena turned toward her, her voice soft but clear. "Music doesn't ask for permission to be heard, madam. Neither do people." The laughter died. A few heads turned, uncertain whether to be offended or impressed. Alexander said nothing. He only watched her each word, each subtle defense she made without armor. She wasn't acting the role he'd given her. She was rewriting it. Vanessa, struggling to recover, gestured toward the buffet. "Well," she said too sweetly, "you've certainly found someone different." Alexander's eyes glinted. "Yes," he said evenly. "For once, something real." The orchestra started again, soft jazz wrapping around the tension. Elena moved through conversations like a calm current. She smiled politely at questions, deflected gossip with grace. When a guest asked where she'd studied music, she said, "On the streets, they teach rhythm better than any conservatory." An older conductor paused, intrigued. "Rhythm," he repeated. "That's rare these days." "Rarity," she said with a small smile, "is often mistaken for worth." Applause broke out somewhere near the head table for the bride and groom's first dance. Alexander stood beside Elena, watching Vanessa glide across the floor. She looked perfect, polished, admired, untouchable. Yet, as the light caught her face, he realized he felt nothing. He looked at Elena instead. She was watching the dance with quiet observation, not envy. He leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "You're not what I expected." She didn't look at him. People rarely are, once you stop looking down. The words sank deeper than he cared to admit. When the evening drew to a close, the gossip had already spread online. Vance's mysterious fiancé, former street violinist, but the photos told a different story. A woman with eyes of quiet confidence and the posture of a queen. As they left the ballroom, the crowd parted instinctively, half in curiosity, half in awe. Outside, rain had begun to fall again, glistening on the city pavement. Elena paused at the car, her reflection merging with his in the window. "If this is your victory," she said softly, "I hope it doesn't wound anyone else." Alexander looked at her, the echo of her words from earlier ringing in his head. "Respect is the only luxury I still own." For the first time, he wondered if this whole arrangement, his revenge, his pride, wasn't a performance at all. And as the city lights shimmered on her gown, he realized she hadn't just played the role of his fiancée. She had become the mirror he didn't know he needed. The first morning after the wedding party, the penthouse felt too quiet. Sunlight spilled across glass and marble, exposing how cold luxury could be when no one filled it with life. Alexander Vance leaned on the railing, coffee in hand, watching the city through the vast window. He'd brought her here out of pride, one more gesture to prove that he was in control of this game. But Elena Ward moved through the place, as if it were her own, unbothered by the weight of his world. By noon, the scent of something warm drifted through the penthouse: garlic, basil, a hint of fresh bread. He followed it to the kitchen. She was standing barefoot on the marble floor, her violin leaning against the counter, sleeves rolled up as she stirred a pot of soup. He stared. "My chef is paid enough to handle that." Without turning, she said, "He wasn't here when the security guard came in hungry." Alexander blinked. "The guard?" She nodded. "He's been working since dawn. People forget the ones who stand behind glass doors." Her voice was even, not accusing, just a quiet observation. She poured soup into 2 bowls, set one aside, and pushed another toward him. "I don't eat lunch this early," he said. "You don't have to." She took her own bowl, sat at the small counter, and began to eat slowly, thoughtfully. The sound of her spoon against porcelain was the only thing alive in that silent, expensive room. He didn't know why, but he sat down. For the first time, the penthouse didn't feel like a museum. The next day, when he returned from a meeting, he found the balcony doors open. The curtains fluttered in the spring air, and Elena was outside, tuning her violin. Down below, a small group of street children had gathered near the security gate, craning their necks upward. Elena lifted the bow and played. The music wasn't classical, it was alive, fluid, rising and falling like laughter. The city noise softened beneath it. Alexander stood by the door, watching. She was radiant in the sunlight, hair loose, face lit with something purer than performance. When she finished, she leaned on the railing and waved at the children. "Same time tomorrow," she called, and their cheers carried up through 30 floors of distance. He stepped outside. "You're giving free concerts now?" Elena smiled faintly. "Music isn't a gift until someone hears it. You could play in concert halls." "I used to." She wiped her hands on a towel. But I realized the audience wasn't listening. They were just clapping for themselves. He didn't respond. For once, words seemed smaller than the moment. That evening, Alexander's assistant came in with documents. As he signed them, the man thanked him in a nervous tone. Alexander gave a short nod habit, not warmth. Elena looked up from her violin case. "Do you ever say the words out loud?" He frowned. "What words?" "Thank you." He gave a half smile. "People know when they're appreciated." "Not always," she said. "Sometimes they need to hear it." He didn't answer, but later that night, when the security guard opened the door for him, he paused. "Thank you, Kevin." The guard blinked, startled. Then he grinned. "You're welcome, sir." The words echoed longer than Alexander expected. Over the following days, the penthouse changed shape. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn back. Sunlight poured through. The sterile corners filled with small touches, a vase of wildflowers she'd picked herself, a soft tune floating through the morning air. Elena never asked for permission. She just moved quietly, bringing warmth where none existed before. One night, she was cleaning the violin strings when he said, "You know this was supposed to be temporary." She looked up, eyes steady. "Everything is, Mr. Vance. That's why we should leave it better than we found it." He didn't know what to say, so he poured her a glass of wine instead. Later, they sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. He asked, "Why do you still play for the kids?" She smiled faintly. "Because they listen with open faces. Adults listen with closed hearts." He studied her profile, the curve of her jaw, the calm in her voice. "You really believe that?" "Yes." She rested the violin on her lap. "When you play for someone who has nothing, you remember what it means to give without expecting applause." Oh, something shifted inside him, then a quiet recognition he didn't want to name. The next morning, he found a small note on the piano. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but it was written in her neat handwriting. "The most expensive thing a man can own is peace of mind, but he only earns it by learning humility." He folded it, placed it in his pocket, and carried it the rest of the day. That evening, as she played softly near the open balcony, he asked, "What did peace ever give you?" She paused, bow hovering in midair. "Time," she said. "And time is where everything true begins." He didn't realize he was smiling until she looked up and saw it. It wasn't his usual grin, the polished, charming curve that made headlines. It was something simpler. For the first time, Alexander Vance smiled without reason. Not because he'd won, not because he'd proven himself, but because, sitting there with her music filling the air, he finally felt still. Later that night, as she left her violin on the couch, he noticed a faint engraving on its worn surface. "For E.W., may your music always find its way home." He didn't ask about it, but he would remember those words long after the music stopped. The city outside the penthouse pulsed with its usual rhythm, honking horns, flashing lights, the heartbeat of wealth and power. But inside, something had changed. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was comfortable. Alexander Vance leaned against the counter, watching Elena move around the kitchen. She was humming softly, sleeves rolled up, hair tied in a loose knot. The smell of garlic and olive oil filled the air. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen someone look so peaceful. "Do you ever stop?" he asked. Elena smiled without turning. "You mean working?" "I mean, existing at this pace. Calm, constant." She shrugged, stirring the pot. "When life keeps trying to break you, you learn to walk gently. It confuses the chaos." He almost laughed. "You really believe that?" "I live by it," she said. Then she glanced at him, eyes warm but sharp. "You, on the other hand, look like a man who fights the air, just to prove it breathes." He smirked. "I've built everything I have by fighting." "Exactly." She set a plate in front of him. "That's why you don't know how to rest." He looked at the food, then at her. For once, he didn't argue. They ate quietly, side by side. Outside, the sun sank behind the skyline, painting the city in amber light. The next afternoon, she invited him for a walk. "You hide too much behind glass," she said. "Let's see how you do on real streets." He laughed, but followed her anyway. They slipped into the crowded avenues of Lower Manhattan, unnoticed. She wore a plain coat, her violin case slung across her shoulder. They stopped near a subway entrance. Elena opened the case, tuned a string, and began to play. People passed without looking, some tossed coins. Most didn't. The wind caught her melody, turning it into something alive and raw. Alexander watched her, hands buried in his coat pockets. He'd seen her perform before, in the penthouse balcony for the kids, but this was different. There was no audience here, no applause, no approval to win. Just her, the bow, and the sound of something too honest to fake. When she finished, an old man clapped softly. Elena bowed her head, smiling. Alexander stepped forward and dropped a folded $100 bill into the case. She glanced up. "That's a very expensive compliment." He smirked. "Consider it an investment." "In what?" "In whatever this is," he said. She laughed quietly, closing the case. "Careful, Mr. Vance. Some things don't give returns." That night, back at the penthouse, he caught himself looking for her more than he wanted to admit. She was on the balcony again, this time polishing her violin. The city lights reflected off the glass, turning her into part of the skyline. "You never get tired of that thing, do you?" he asked. She looked up. "Does a man get tired of his voice?" He hesitated. "Maybe if no one listens." She smiled. "Then you play for yourself." "Oh." He watched her fingers trace the edge of the instrument, gentle, deliberate. Something tightened in his chest. Days blurred together. They started cooking together, walking together, talking about everything except what they really felt. He caught himself asking her opinion on business decisions, laughing at her sarcasm, staying up later just to hear her play one more song. And yet, when she looked at him too long, he changed the subject. He didn't want her to see through the cracks, the guilt, the exhaustion, the loneliness that had always followed him like a shadow. But she already had. One evening, they sat by the window with wine and quiet music. Elena said, "I used to think wealth made people powerful." He turned to her. "And now?" "Now I think only kindness does." He looked down at his glass. "Kindness doesn't win wars." "No," she said softly, "but it ends them." He stared at her profile, the way her eyes softened at the edge, the calm strength in her tone. He wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that kindness was weakness, but he couldn't, because she'd already changed the way he saw everything. Later that night, he walked past the living room. She had fallen asleep on the sofa, violin beside her, the soft light of a lamp painting her face in gold. Her hand rested lightly over the instrument as if guarding it, or maybe grounding herself. Alexander stood in the doorway, watching. For once, he didn't see a woman playing a role for his revenge. He saw someone who carried peace into every room she entered. He thought of all the nights he'd stared at numbers, contracts, empty glasses of whiskey trying to fill silence with victories that never lasted. But this silence, this quiet, breathing stillness felt full. He walked closer, careful not to wake her. A loose strand of hair fell over her face. He reached out but stopped before touching it. For the first time in his life, Alexander Vance was afraid of breaking something he couldn't replace. He sat down in the chair across from her, eyes heavy but unwilling to close. When dawn came, he was still there watching the light stretch across her sleeping form, realizing with every passing second that he'd lost the only battle that ever mattered. He had fallen in love. The evening began with laughter, the hollow kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Graham had organized a dinner at a private club uptown, the kind of place where crystal clinks and ego echoes. Alexander hadn't wanted to go, not tonight. But when Graham teased, "Come on, Alex, you won, didn't you? Show up, drink something expensive, and celebrate your little masterpiece," he couldn't refuse. Pride was a leash he still wore, even when it burned. He showed up late, still wearing the same gray suit he'd worn to the office. Inside, glasses were raised, music swelled, and Graham's grin was too loud for the quiet ache in his chest. "Gentlemen," Graham declared, slinging an arm around his shoulder. "To Alexander Vance, man of the hour." Who knew fake love could look so real? Laughter rippled through the room. Someone added, "Guess the street girl played her role perfectly." Alexander's stomach tightened. He forced a smile, because that's what power did, it smiled when it should have stayed silent. He raised his glass halfway. "To closure," he said quietly. What he didn't see was the slim shadow standing at the door. Elena. She hadn't meant to follow him, but when his assistant mentioned the celebration, she couldn't ignore the sharp pull in her gut. She'd walked for blocks in the drizzle before finding the club. Through the open door of the private hall, she saw him laughing, surrounded, playing the man she thought he'd outgrown. Her pulse thudded. The words reached her before she could breathe. Fake love, street girl. Her hand trembled on the doorframe. She turned before anyone could notice her, her reflection catching in a gilded mirror, poised, unbroken, until she stepped into the dark. The night was still heavy with rain when Elena walked away from the club. The city shimmered under the drizzle, every light fractured by water, every sound too sharp. She didn't run, didn't tremble, didn't speak. But inside, something had splintered. By the time she reached the penthouse, the air smelled faintly of him, cedar, cologne, a life of control. She turned on the light. The silence hit harder than the laughter she'd just left behind. Her eyes fell on the shelves near the study. That room, his father's office, he called it, was the one place he'd told her not to enter. The door wasn't locked. It never had been. She pushed it open. Inside, everything was immaculate. Framed photos, awards, papers stacked with precision. She wandered, fingers brushing along the mahogany desk, until she saw an old portfolio half tucked beneath newer files. It wasn't the folder itself that froze her. It was the seal embossed in gold. Asterisk, asterisk, Vance Energy. Merger acquisition. 2010. Asterisk, asterisk. She sat down. Her hands opened it slowly, as if touching something sacred. The first page was a printed memo with two signatures, Edward Vance and Richard Ward. Beneath them, notes scribbled in pen clauses about asset transfers, liquidations, pending debts. Then came the newspaper clippings, stapled together. Headlines she'd been too young to understand once. Asterisk, asterisk, Ward Industries declares bankruptcy. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Suicide rumors follow collapse. Asterisk, 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 Vance. Energy secures final assets. Asterisk, asterisk. Her father's face stared back at her from a grainy photo, smiling for cameras the same week their home was repossessed. Tears fell before she even realized she was crying. One hit the page and bled the ink. She turned another sheet. Handwritten notes, Alexander's father to legal advisors. Asterisk. Ward's resistance is emotional. Push harder. He'll fold. Asterisk. Her breath broke. Her violin leaned in the corner beside the window. She picked it up, not to play but to hold, like something that had once saved her and couldn't anymore. When Alexander came home, the elevator doors opened to silence. But it wasn't peaceful silence. It was the kind that made air feel heavier. "Elena?" he called. No answer. He walked toward the study, and that's when he saw her. Sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers, her face streaked with tears that glistened under the desk lamp. The folder lay open beside her. He stopped cold. "Oh God." Her voice was hoarse. "It was your father." He took a step closer. "Elena, listen to me." "No." She looked up, eyes sharp with disbelief. "I listened to you for weeks. Every word you said. Every lie you didn't correct. Elena, please, this was before me. I didn't even know you knew tonight." She pointed at the folded newspaper on the floor, the same one from earlier, his fingerprints still fresh on it. "You knew. And you said nothing." He tried to breathe. "I was going to tell you." "When?" she snapped. "Before or after your next toast with Graham?" He froze. Her laugh came bitter, shaking. "I saw you. I heard them." Asterisk. Fake love. Street girl. Asterisk. You smiled. You lifted your glass like it was a trophy. His yav clenched. "I didn't mean it. But you did," she whispered. "Even for a second you did. Because that's who you are when you're with them." He knelt down slowly. "Elena, I'm not my father." Her tears shimmered in the light. "Then why does it feel like I've lived through the same story twice?" He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "You think saying times it was the past times makes it disappear? That those men are ghosts? They aren't. They're alive in the way you look at victory." His throat tightened. "You have to believe me, I never wanted to hurt you. If I could take back everything my father did." "You can't." The words landed like a quiet blade. She gathered the papers, her movements trembling but deliberate. "I loved my father because he believed people could still be good, even when the world took everything from him." She looked up at him. "He died believing in that. I was foolish enough to start believing again with you." He stood there, silent, broken open. The storm outside rattled the windows. Elena straightened, clutching her violin case. "You used me to fix your pride. Your father used my father to build his empire. Tell me, Alexander, what's the difference?" He couldn't answer. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, voice trembling but steady. "You say it was your father's sin, but tonight, when you raised that glass, it became yours." The silence that followed was unbearable. She turned toward the door. "Elena, please," he said, voice cracking. "Don't go." She paused just long enough for him to believe she might stay. Then softly, almost kindly, she said, "You wanted closure, Alexander. Congratulations." The door closed behind her with a sound that didn't echo. It settled, final, like the end of a song she would never play again. Rain fell in slow, deliberate sheets, washing the city clean of its noise. Elena walked through it without an umbrella, the violin case pressed to her chest. Her dress clung to her skin, but her head stayed high. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. Each step was a quiet declaration that she still had one thing left: her pride. Behind her, the penthouse lights burned like a distant wound. She had given him her trust once, and he had spent it like everything else he'd ever owned. Now, she carried the last of it away, one heartbeat at a time. Alexander watched from the window. He didn't move. The rain distorted her figure until she disappeared into the blur of headlights. For a moment, the city seemed to swallow her whole. And then there was only silence. He tried to drown that silence the next morning with work, with noise, with control. Meetings filled his calendar, his voice cutting through boardrooms like precision steel. But every deal felt hollow, every handshake cold. He would stare at the graphs, the numbers, the smiling faces of investors, and feel nothing. When night came, he returned to the penthouse and sat where she used to sit by the window, where the world looked small and honest. He unlocked his phone and pressed play. The sound of her violin filled the room. A simple melody, one she used to play while the city slept. It wasn't polished or perfect. It trembled with life. He leaned back, eyes closed, letting the music break him open. Every note reminded him of how she had looked at the world, not as something to conquer, but something to understand. Hours passed. The track ended, then began again. He didn't stop it. He couldn't. Somewhere between the last note and the next silence, he whispered her name, barely audible, more breath than voice. "Elena." But the room didn't answer. Only the rain did, soft, steady, and endless. For weeks, Alexander lived like a man half awake. The city kept moving: cars, lights, laughter, but his world had narrowed to the memory of her voice. He saw her sometimes from afar, performing in small corners of the city, charity events, subway platforms, community halls. She looked radiant, untouchable, alive. Each time, he wanted to step forward. Each time, he stayed still. 1 month passed before he finally broke the silence. The idea came one sleepless night, when her song drifted again through his speakers. If he couldn't erase the past, he could at least honor the truth. Not his truth, hers. A week later, every major outlet in New York carried the same headline: Alexander Vance to host charity concert in honor of Elena Ward. The event was set in the city's grand concert hall. The invitation list read like a map of power bankers, artists, journalists. But this time, it wasn't about wealth. It was about her. When the evening came, the stage glowed soft gold. The program cover bore her name. The proceeds, every cent, were pledged to a new community arts foundation, the Ward Initiative. Alexander stepped onto the stage as the applause faded. Cameras flashed. He didn't look at them. He looked at the empty seat near the back, the one he hoped she might fill. He took a breath. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled. "I married her to prove a point," he began. "But she proved that love without respect is nothing." The room fell still. "She didn't need my name. She didn't want my money. All she ever asked for was dignity, and I failed to give it. I hurt the woman who showed me what it means to be human." He paused, the silence deep enough to carry every regret he'd hidden. "This concert isn't an apology that can erase what I did. It's a promise that her voice, her music, her kindness will never be silenced again. The audience rose, their applause thunderous and real. But Alexander didn't hear it. His eyes had found her at the back of the hall, standing still, her violin case in hand. For a long moment, neither of them moved. He didn't smile. He only bowed his head slightly, a silent plea for forgiveness, for another chance. And as the orchestra began to play the first notes of her melody, she closed her eyes. The song rose through the hall like light breaking through glass, her song, now his confession. The final note lingered in the air, trembling like a heartbeat that refused to fade. The hall was silent, hundreds of people holding their breath, waiting. Alexander stepped forward again, his voice low, raw. "When she left," he said, "I learned what silence sounds like when it means regret. Every day since, I've missed her laughter, her strength, her truth. I built an empire but lost the only thing that made me human." His gaze found her. She was standing now, eyes glistening under the warm stage lights. He took the microphone, descended the stairs, and walked toward her through the parted crowd. When he reached her row, he stopped, then knelt. "I don't want redemption anymore," he whispered. "I just want you. Not for pride, not for show, for love. Will you marry me, Elena?" For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then she smiled a quiet, trembling smile and nodded. "Yes," she said simply. The audience erupted in applause. Some cheered, others wiped their eyes. He rose, and she met him halfway. Their kiss was soft, unhurried. Real, the kind that forgives without forgetting. As they left the hall, hands intertwined, the golden light of sunset poured through the open doors. On the wall behind them, the banner from the concert shimmered in the fading glow. "Respect, the only deal worth signing. Sometimes love begins where pride finally ends." If this story moved you, follow Valen Stories, where power learns to love again. Don't forget to turn on the bell so you never miss the next tale of redemption and heart. Thank you for watching.